As those familiar with my channel know, I have been gung-ho into Lolita for a while now, and those who know me personally know that I have been in some way or another history bounding since around middle school. And recently I found that these two fashions are strikingly similar in a lot of interesting ways. Not a profound realization, I'm kind of stating the obvious, but still, bear with me for a second. I began to put these thoughts together back in December when I was working on my bloomers pattern, and I was thinking through who I wanted this pattern to be useful for, and history bounders and Lolitas both came to mind right in like the get-go, as well as people who work in theaters, but that's beside the point. And it's not that surprising that both of these fashions utilize bloomers because they both have a heavy historic influence. Now let's define these fashions really quick. Lolita is a Japanese subculture that focuses on celebrating femininity in a non-exploitative way, to sum it up as quickly as possible, and it takes a lot of inspiration from specifically Victorian and rococo styles. And history bounding is whenever you dress in a particular way to emulate the silhouettes, the general style, or the color schemes, or the prints that were very, very popular in any one era. But the thing is, history bounding is mostly done by costumers who want to wear their costuming clothes that they work so hard in day-to-day life. So there's a lot of adaptation done to make them more practical. Most people who are attracted to alternative fashions in general tend to bleed from one fashion to another. This ring is annoying me and I'm gonna take it off real quick. A really good example of this bleed over is Lovely Laura's video where she talks about how everyone who was a scene kid back in the day is into Lolita now, which she's not wrong. But even if you look a little bit further than that, fashion communities tend to pull trends from each other fairly often. You can see this really clearly if you look at goths and e-people, the e-girls and the e-boys and the e-pals. They tend to share fashion quite a bit, and we can even see this as well with the e-people that are taking Lolita fashion and playing around with it in a very not Lolita way. Cover your shoulders, guys. But a fun thing that I'm noticing is that with casual Lolita outfits, they tend to look like history bounding, as well as cottagecore, as well as possibly royalty core, and potentially fairy core. There are obviously key distinctions between history bounding and Lolita. For example, Lolita tends to be very puffy and full and not very practical for squeezing through tight spaces or driving. Whereas history bounding, like I said before, has this focus on practicality. When I think of history bounding, like the cliche article of clothing that I think of is the Victorian walking skirt that's been shortened slightly. But when you compare T-length Lolita to history bounding, it tends to really start to blend together, and I'm gonna show you some examples in a minute. Okay, we're gonna play a game. I have a bunch of images, and I want you to guess whether the person in the image wearing the outfit is a Lolita or a history bounder. And there's gonna be like 4 seconds for you to guess, and then it's gonna pop up with the answer. Are you ready? Okay. You see what I mean, right? It's not like a one-to-one thing, you know? And the dead giveaway of which is which, for me at least, tends to be the exposed shoulders, the exposed legs, and the way that accessories are done, you know? So there's a little bit of a kawaii whisper in Lolita that's just ever present, even when it's a Mary Magdalene outfit. Whereas with history bounding, there's not a lot of nonsense to it. There aren't a ton of accessories, and there's not a lot of excess. It's a more modest style, which is funny because Lolita is more modest when it comes to like the physical showing of the body and like the rules that are involved in that, but then history bounding tends towards modesty in like a materialistic sense of the word. That's interesting. I hadn't noticed that until just now. It's not even in my script. Wild. Lolita is actually kind of unfairly known for its guidelines. There's kind of a cliche that Lolitas are mean and exclusive because we have rules for what is and is not Lolita fashion. And as you see, it's because all of this stuff really clearly bleeds together. Like, your Lolita outfit that breaks all the rules very quickly becomes a Fairy K outfit or a history bounded outfit, you know? If you walk out with your shoulders out and no petticoat, you might just be history bounding, which is fine. But I'm gonna get to that in a second. I keep getting ahead of myself. I'm just very excited. I don't believe that history bounding has any rules really, except for that you're pulling inspiration from an era. And that's a huge box to play with, you know? There's so many eras you could pull from to history bound, and there's so many things that made those eras distinctive, you know? A Victorian walking skirt and a blouse is not going to be history bounding for someone who's interested in studying the Romans, for example. Their history bounding would probably be like a nice tunic dress, maybe some sandals, you know? It's almost no rules. Except I don't tend to see history bounders mixing eras, except maybe Victorian and Edwardian, but those overlapped on the actual, like, timeline. So I don't know that I would count that as mixing eras, necessarily. But with Lolita, you know, you have Rococo things happening at the same time as Victorian things happening. Lolita will also take, like, the 1960s swing dancing silhouette and smoosh it with the Georgian Regency dress silhouette and come out with, like, a cohesive thing, which is a little tricky, not gonna lie. Both are drawn to puff sleeves and a really nipped waist, although, like I said before, the waistline in Lolita is really specific and kind of weird when you think about it from a lot of perspectives at once, which this whole video might just be me, like, over-analyzing something that everyone already knew, but that's fine. Layering is common in both as well, and pinafore styles and pinafore dresses, as well as spenders with skirts, the salupette style, I've only ever seen it written, I've never heard it pronounced, so I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's French. Both are also very Ghibli obsessed. So Estine has famously done cottagecore versions of Ghibli outfits, and Lolita is a J fashion, so obviously there's going to be some Ghibli crossover there. Lolitas also deviate from history bounding because they tend towards really dramatic prints and really intricate details. And with history bounding, I tend to see more solid prints or historic inspired prints, which you do see in classic Lolita as well as royalty core, but Gothic and Sweet Lolita tend towards really interesting, intricate prints. Also, history bounding in name is relatively new. The earliest that I saw it, personally, was around 2016. That's when I first saw the word popping up. I know that in 2017 is when it, like, exploded on the internet. Before the term history bounding was used, I'd seen the word casual steampunk used a few times. Or people would, like, explain that they were dressing like a certain era but subtly, or they would just flat out say, like, I made this historic garment and I'm styling it in a modern way to justify the huge amount of time I spent on it. But history bounding as a community and as a term, relatively new. Whereas Lolita has been an established thing since arguably the 1970s, but that's a hot debate and I'm not going to stick my toes in that water because I will drown. I will drown. That being said, there's a ton of crossover between the two communities. And ever since I first realized this Lolita history bounding relationship, I've been seeing it everywhere. The Lolitas in my local community are always talking about Bernadette Banner and So is Steen. Like, it's come up multiple times. And there were Lolitas at COVID, including Lady at Wonderland, actually. And the solo artist and Inky Soupy, they hang out all the time, and they look fabulous doing it. Like, their tea party video is peak aesthetic. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm overthinking, but I do definitely think that Lolita is technically history bounding. But history bounding is not inherently Lolita. if that makes sense. Like, there's a Venn diagram happening, you know? And history bounding is like this huge, undefined circle. And Lolita is like over here, and there's some overlap into history bounding. Like, it's pretty thoroughly shoved in there. I will draw a representation of this because describing it is not working. Anyway, I've been Maya, you've been watching me ramble about obscure fashions for hopefully not more than 10 minutes, and I hope that you had a fun time, because I had a fun time thinking about this and rewriting this script for about 3 months. So, yeah. Anyways, that's all I've got. Thanks for sticking around. Bye, friends! Actually, dressed myself today, and I gotta say, I am feeling really cute. Typically history bound. Jog faster so my dog stop barking!